I'm the chair of something called the Sustainable Growing Media Task Force. What's all that about? That's getting the entire horticultural industry and the entire gardening industry to stop using peat. Peat destroys peat bogs. There are alternatives out there, but gardeners and the horticultural sector are very loyal to peat. And for them, that's a massive transformational change. It's like asking people to go out and shoot their mother or something. You can't. I've used peat for 30 years. It works. Don't ask me to use something else. And some of the sort of almost the emotional aspects of that are as important as the intellectual, technical issues of doing that. And finally, I also chair the local nature partnership for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, which I've been doing for about the last 6 months. I live in Cornwall and work in London, which is sort of interesting and complicated, but fun. But actually looking at sustainable development, social issues through the lens of a whole region. And it's a really interesting region because if you look at it through the lens of an economist, it's the poorest region in England. Yeah? Productivity is as low as Poland. Yeah, really interesting statistics. And we get a lot of European money. Don't knock that. We're getting £500 million for one county to develop that and get us to be richer. But there's a really interesting twist of which your work goes to the heart of. It's also the happiest county in England. And you say that to them, so what? Yeah. Its growth isn't good enough. Its productivity isn't good enough. But it's happy. So, and I think what our movement is doing is actually saying, well, hang on here, we've got to value that. What's going on there? There are real issues in Cornwall, and I don't want to belittle the small issues in Cornwall. And some people put hands up and say, but, unemployment, that sort of stuff. So I'm not belittling the issue. What I'm belittling is the stark contrast between it's all about growth and those people don't actually seem to be valuing the other statistic. That's something to hang on to, and maybe some of the answers lies in what's making that statistic so successful. And I think that's really, really interesting, and that's something I really want to build on. My background is corporates. Most of my DNA is working for large corporates, B&Q, Kingfisher, SAB Miller, and the Virgin Group on CSR, sustainable development, always with a bias towards the environmental issues. But what's really fascinating and keeping me sort of thinking at the moment are these, sorry, I'm having a struggle with this, are these three pillars: environment, social, and economic. Pillars for what? What are they actually holding up? And I think sometimes we're so busy thinking about the three pillars, we're not quite sure what those three pillars are holding up. I mean, I would say they're holding up something called sustainable development. Others might say, no, they're holding up the economy. We've heard this phrase, it's all about the economy, stupid. And I think, what actually is it? It goes back to my Cornwall example. What actually is the temple? How would we actually articulate that temple? And I think it's something slightly different, and I think you guys go into the heart of this. But actually, there is a little bit of a confession, and Matt did say, don't mention this, yeah? But I'm going to mention it. This conference is a bit of a con. All these cameras and everything are doing something slightly different, yeah? You're actually part of an assessment group, yeah? Some of the politicians like Obama and Cameron have seen this sort of Cornish story. They've seen the stories you're doing, and they're going, you know what, we really can't... This current democracy thing isn't quite working. What we want to do is get 30 or 40 people from around the world, yeah, who really get it, yeah? So what's going to happen in the next few weeks, those who have passed the psychometrics which these cameras are doing, are going to get a phone call and they're going to say, I've got a small task for you. Could you run the world for us? Can you just run everything for us, yeah? This is a metaphor, by the way. Don't go home and say, guess what? I'm on a... I've got a massive promotion coming. It's a joke, yeah? You're going to and you're going to run the world, yeah? But the one ask is can you run it with the same ethos you currently run the ethos of where social enterprise is going? Can you make that the DNA of what you're doing? Because we think you're onto something, right? So I think that's really interesting. So you've now got this role, and you've come back here with these other 30 or 40 people, and you've got your flip charts and your felt tip pens and your post-it notes. We're now into brainstorming mode. And because you'll start asking yourself some fundamental questions, wouldn't you? And it goes back to, what is this temple? What is it we actually want to achieve? What is the product of this social enterprise called World PLC, or World Social Enterprise, etc., etc.? And I would actually say, I think you would end up with something I would call, you might have different words, but I think we'd be agreeing with each other, quality of life. We want to give every human being on this planet a good quality of life. Huge debate about what we mean by quality of life, but I think we would agree that something about giving people good lives. We wouldn't necessarily focus on growth. We would say growth might be one of the tools by which we create quality of life, but we're about quality of life. And then you would start looking at who's good in logistics here, right? How many raw materials do we have? And then we would get quite scared because we think, hang on here. The sort of quality of life we have in this country, we've all heard this statistic, needs 3 planets worth of resources to give it to 7 billion people alive today. Because we've got 7 billion potential customers out there. To give them a good quality of life through the way we do it here in England, needs 3 planets worth of resources. So our logistics, our inventory, our supply chain isn't up for the task. Shit, a bit of a problem, isn't it? Yeah. And then let's look at the outcomes, yeah? Well, one, there are 7 billion people, and we know a lot of people don't even have access to this type of quality of life. And actually, this type of quality of life actually has some quite uncomfortable outcomes. Obesity, diabetes. So we're not reaching everybody. We don't have the means to reach everybody. And those who we do reach, in theory, aren't actually having as great quality of life as we would have hoped. So the outcomes aren't quite right. And then, of course, climate change. Nobody invented climate change. Nobody invented obesity. But they're outcomes of the quality of life we're currently producing. And this is where this transformational change bit in my title comes from. We need to turn around this business model. We heard about the story about Blue Mineral Water. She came in, had to turn the business around. We have to turn around this business called giving 7 billion people a good quality of life, or 9 billion by 2050. We shorthand all that narrative into the 9 billion challenge at BITC. And what we're saying to our business leaders, sustainable development is about us working together as a community of businesses to be ready to give 9 billion people a good quality of life. Because the way we're doing it at the moment isn't working. Well, there's not enough raw materials, and there's too many unintended consequences for those who actually have access to that type of life. And what I'm doing here is making this a practical project. And I think where the environmental movement, and even I as a sort of professional CSR person, sometimes get slightly stuck, is we make this slightly ethical. We make this a bit like a moral judgment. You're unsustainable. I'm here to talk to you about sustainability, yes, because that's right and that's ethical, yeah? And it's a very subtle but important tone of voice here, which I'm trying to change. What I'm trying to say, no, actually sustainable development is a practical project. Most of the successful business leaders we've seen, be them massive Ian Cheshires or the smaller social enterprises, are very clever at what they do. That's why they're in those roles. That's why they succeed. And they're good because they turn sort of value-driven ideas into practical can-do projects. And that's what I'm trying to do with this narrative. That's what I'm trying to do with this sort of metaphor. You're now 30 people. You've got a very practical problem. It's not an ethical problem. It's a practical problem. We've got to change the way we do things in order to make sure that 9 billion people by 2050 enjoy a good quality of life. It's a practical project. The building of a temple is a practical project. Architects, stonemasons. Yeah? At some stage, it was just somebody with a plan saying, we'll do that by then, we need that skill set, we need that skill set in that place at that time, that's how much it's going to cost, and that's what it's going to look like when we finish. Yeah? That's what we need to do with sustainable development. That's what we need to do with CSR. And I think we're getting closer, and that's what we're trying to do at BITC. And what I say at BITC is I use the Apollo landing. I'm 50 this year, so if you do the maths, one of my first memories was sitting at lounge with my mum and dad watching the man walk on the moon. Yeah, very exciting, I still remember it today, and we still talk about it as a moment in history when mankind did something clever and special. Yeah? And what it also shows is that mankind can do anything when it wants to. And again, it's another important ethos of sustainable development. Rather than it's always too difficult, we put a man on the moon. We can do anything we want. Yeah? But the important thing about putting a man on the moon is we decided to put a man on the moon. The first thing you need to do is actually decide to do it. And that's the problem with sustainable development. We talk about balance. Sustainable development is the balance of the 3 pillars. I'm not sure what you're asking me to do. Yeah? And also the point about balance, there's a tone of voice there, again, which is slightly off message. Balance means slow down, stop, be careful. Yeah, I'm balanced now. Yeah, sustainable development is actually a really urgent problem. Rainforests are on fire. The oceans are boiling. The climate is changing. People are ill now. People are killing themselves because they're not happy. People are starving in Africa. Come on, get on with it. Yeah. And that's what we've got to do with sustainable development. We've got to make it an urgent, exciting project with a very clear goal, hence the 9 billion challenge. And this is the narrative we're testing at BITC, and it's beginning to get real traction. But the other thing about sustainable development, where I think you guys are also making, this movement is making a really important contribution, is this notion of specialism. 170,000 people worked for 9 years to put 2 men on the moon. Yeah? They weren't all doing the same thing. They were specialists. 300 people worked for 9 years to make 2 pairs of boots. Yeah? No boots, no moon landing. Yeah? And those 300 people at the end of the day were just cobblers. Yeah? Another 300 made fuel. Another 300 did the navigation. Another 300 made the landing pad. Yeah? These real successful big projects are delivered by specialism. The reason why I say that is when you look at things like GRI, if you think of all we need as business leaders are simple toolboxes. And it always boils down to manage your waste, manage your water, manage your carbon, and you'll be more sustainable. Absolutely, you have to do all those things. But what we're now saying at BITC, what's your moon boot? If you agree with the 9 billion challenge, what is it your company can do? Who can your company reach that nobody else can? What is your unique, most important contribution? And there's a tension here, and BITC is really sort of working this one out for itself. We're so used to getting every company to do the same thing. When you all to Mayday, remember Mayday? When you all to reduce your carbon footprint. You know, we could have done a Mayday for water. When you all to reduce your water footprint. Absolutely, these are important incremental changes, but they're not the transformational change we need to do to deliver the 9 billion challenge. And that's what we're really focusing on. How do you do that? How do you build that temple? And so what we're now saying is, and what I've and all these different roles I talk about really help me realise this, it actually boils down to very simple questions and very 2 important points of intervention. It's all about choices. And what we need to do as a movement is actually help people understand what choices they have. And so I say it now boils down to 2 places where choices are made which really matter. One of them is in the boardroom of companies large and small. And the other one is in the sitting room of customers. And so the first one are the boardroom questions. What type of business do I want? What type of business model do I need to have to be fit for the future? What type of business do I need to have a clearly articulated moon boot type contribution towards the 9 billion challenge? And the other set of questions is me as an individual. Yeah? What type of life do I want? Yeah? Let's go back to the boardroom. The boardroom questions boil down to sort of 5 themes. And what we now say is if you're a company, large or small, if you don't have these debates at board level, say every 6 months, you don't get sustainability. You're not part of the Apollo. You're not part of the temple building project, yeah? Megatrends. How will these big megatrends affect my business? You know, if I'm an iPad designer, I'm listening to the market. I want a bigger iPad. I want a cheaper iPad. I want a cooler iPad. I want a faster iPad, yeah? You have to do all of that. Fine. But that's only half. Don't just listen to the market. Don't just listen to what your customers are asking. Listen to the science and what the megatrends are saying. Climate change, obesity, and all that sort of stuff. Is there a link between iPads and obesity? There's a lot who argue there is. So what are you going to do as the iPad manufacturer to decouple that link between, child health and your product? You're part of that social movement. You've changed the way families operate because of your technology. What can you do differently to make sure that trend creates a positive social outcome and not deny the fact that the negative ones are something to do with you? So look at the science, look at the trends, and use them to shape your business as much as what the market wants for the actual details. Yeah. The second one I've already talked about, which is what's your unique contribution? What is your unique contribution towards the moon landing or the 9 billion challenge? The third one is what do you as a leadership team want to be remembered for? 2050, you're not going to be remembered for 4.6 like-for-like growths in 2014. Yeah? You have to do that, and that's important, but you're not going to be remembered for that. That's the day job. What's your big personal contribution as a leadership team? Yeah? Balance. Have you got the balance right? And by this, we normally mean short-term and long-termism. The biggest challenge for business leaders, and I think politicians, is short-termism. The next year matters so much, I can't even think about 2 or 3 years' time. So you're making the wrong decisions in the short term. How do you engineer your decision-making process to include long-term? And finally, what is the ask of your customer? Because we're actually asking you, ultimately, to transform your business model from linear clothes buying, grow it, make it into a t-shirt, throw it away, to what Marks & Spencer's called shopping. Grow it, sell it, put it back into the system and use it again. Yeah? B&Q, with Street Club, moving from selling power tools to creating the platforms for people to lend each other their power tools. Great models, tick all the boxes from the stuff we're working on, but ultimately you have to ask the customer to do it. Yeah? You can't do that on your own. So what is that ask? How do you need to engage your customer in with that transformational change? Really interesting. And what we're finding when we talk to board members, and we're talking board members of companies, the big FTSE 100 companies, a number of times they say, you know what? We haven't really had that conversation. Yeah? Or we don't get what you're getting to. Yeah? And so that's what we're saying, is that they're the conversations you need to get to. And then the next set of questions is you as an individual. We as an environmental movement say we've got to make it sweet, simple and fun. Change a light bulb, stop a dripping tap. Absolutely, and the cumulative effect of everybody doing that makes a significant difference. But a lot of sustainability is now going to the deeper questions. What makes me happy? Where do I want to live? Relationship with self. And because it's slightly taboo that, can't talk about that. But it really matters. We're losing life skills. We need to find ways of getting closer to those sorts of questions. Because if our ultimate product is life satisfaction, quality of life, we need to remind individuals that they have a big say in these types of questions themselves, and it doesn't all come from the supermarkets. So what I'm really saying here is imagine a world which is united around these... this thing is a real challenge. Imagine a world which is united... Sorry, let's just... You tell I don't wear things around my ears very often. So that's what we're really trying to do at BIT, and that's what I'm trying to do in those other roles. And I think it's really interesting. You get that initial sort of, I'm not quite sure where you're coming from. And then after a while, people say, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's right. And so I think what it's about being braver and having these slightly more interesting conversations with individuals and board leaders. But there's another way of looking at this, which goes back to those 3 pillars: environment, social, and economic. I think there's several very clear questions here, which we're sort of asking ourselves without realizing we're asking ourselves. And if we really want to achieve proper social value, proper sustainable development, some of these most fundamental questions we can't duck from, which is what makes people happy, because that equals quality of life. What makes communities truly function? I was always struck by how straightforward the big lunch idea from Eden Project was, and how much impact it's actually had. It's so simple, isn't it? Yeah. And the ultimate one, which we tend to call natural capital, or ecosystem services, because we like big language, and I do especially. But the real question is, what's the best use of land? What is the best use of land with all the different demands on it? And if we just had those types of conversations, I think we would get to sustainability a lot quicker. So what it really is about is getting everybody to think about long term. It's getting people to increase their spectrum of sight from not just what the customer is saying now for that particular product and what the economic data is saying now and for the next quarter, but global megatrends and the science. Put that in the information pool and you'll make better quality decisions. There is another aspect here as well where entrepreneurism, I think, is really important. And that's the role of emotional intelligence. There's a lot of talk in this movement, there's a lot of talk in the sustainable development movement about KPIs. How do we measure it? How do we measure it? I get that, and I'm not anti how you measure it, but I do sometimes think let's not just give it too much weight. Yeah? Most of the big decisions we make in our lives are driven by emotional intelligence. Yeah? And you go into that, how you're walking down, I need a new house, I need to move. You don't get out a set of KPIs, do you? You walk in and there's that famous thing, you know you're going to buy that house in the first 2 minutes or the first 20 seconds. There's something in here, this massive computer which has taken 9 billion years to evolve, processes information so quick, we don't actually know how it got to that place, but it tends to be right. Yeah? That's what entrepreneurs do well. So what I'm saying is I think some of the magic in the social values movement, some of the magic in sustainable development might not be measurable, but not belittle it for it. If you can measure it, fine. We do need some numbers because we do need that sort of discipline, but don't get obsessed by it because it can be a bit of a distraction. Some of the best decisions I've made in my career and in my life, I haven't been able to measure, but I still stand by them. Yeah? Some of the worst decisions I've made in my life, I haven't been able to measure, and I regret them. But I don't know a single measurement which would have stopped me making the bad decision in my life. Yeah? Emotional intelligence is a real skill. It's a real asset. Let's use it. So for me, and I'm closing now, it's defining that ultimate temple. At the moment, we live in a culture where the temple is economic growth. I think the temple should be quality of life. And I think this movement is really, really, really close to getting there. I live in a county which is the poorest county in the UK, but also the happiest. Yeah? Could do with a bit more money, but not at the expense of happiness. Yeah? This type of thinking is the closest thinking I've ever seen, which will get a little bit more money into Cornwall to address the real social problems in Cornwall, but not at the expense of happiness. So we're onto something really, really, really big. I started off with the joke about saying the cunning plan is to get 30 of us to run the country. What a shame that it is a joke. Yeah, because actually I think it could be a really powerful reality. Thank you.